Hello, everybody. Welcome to this podcast. In this podcast, we're talking about cultural identity in America, and we're going to start by the latest election bombshell in the US, where Trump made a comment about Kamala Harris's identity, saying that she was Indian for some time. Well, I'll get into that in just a second. But let me first set it up for you. Before we start, please click the subscribe button and make sure you also click the bell and select all. That way you'll know when we upload future videos. Okay, so let's begin. We have our friend, our guest, Leon. How are you?
Good, Ben. How's everything with you?
Everything's good. Thank you. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hey, everyone, what's up?
All right, so welcome everybody. So what we're talking about is cultural identity in America, and we're going to start with the latest news and this bombshell that Trump dropped in an interview. He was saying that Kamala Harris was, correct me if I'm wrong, Leon, but didn't he say that she was Indian for some time, and then all of a sudden, and this is the really funny, ridiculous statement, which all of a sudden she turned black. I think that's what he said.
Yeah,
Is that what he
yeah,
said?
that's correct. Yeah. Is she
Okay.
black?
How
Yeah.
do you suddenly turn black? Okay, so
hmm
what's going on here? So is she Indian? What is her heritage?
Yeah, she's Indian and black. Yeah.
She's
Southeast Asia. Yeah.
she's half Indian and she's half
She's half,
black.
yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so so Trump is saying that she identified as Indian for forever and ever, and then all of a sudden she now identifies as black. So maybe what he's not saying is that she turned black. It sounds really funny, but maybe what he's trying to say is that all of a sudden started to identify as black in order to suit her needs, in order to help her in the election. Is that what he meant, do you think?
Yeah, I would think so. He's just using it because all that throughout that time, she's saying that she's mixed, like half black or half Indian, or maybe she's going more of Indian. And then all of a
Yes.
sudden, now that she's being a candidate for presidency, she wants
Hmm.
to get the black voters. So she's saying that she's black, but yet she forgets to mention that she's also half Indian, but she's trying to push a campaign that she's black. But what about her other half, which is Indian? So I think that's what he's trying to say. Hmm.
Okay. And yeah, I think she's also been criticized, of course, by Republicans, by JD Vance specifically, that I heard something about her being a chameleon. Like she morphs to be whatever she needs to be to appease whoever she needs to appease. And so he was saying that in a rally in Georgia, all of a sudden she adopted a fake Southern accent. That's what he said about her. Like, so she just changes according to her needs. Did you hear this?
I didn't hear that, but that's kind
Okay,
of funny. I mean, her
that
being
is
as a
funny.
comedian, I mean, it seems to be okay. I mean, correct too, because
Yeah,
it seems that that's what she's doing. Yeah.
that's right. But okay, so what we're talking about is cultural identity, and like Kamala Harris, many of us, myself included, and I think you as well, Leon, we have a dual cultural identity, right? Um,
hmm
and there are a lot of people in America who are a dual culture. So I think that let's talk about this idea of, and I think I've spoken to a lot of people who are maybe not that familiar with what an American looks like, or who is an American, right? And a lot of people will have told me that to them, the face of an American is either somebody who's a white American or a black American. So it's either white or black. But in reality, there are so many Americans who are not white or black, and they're multicultural, right? Because that is how our country is. We're a country of immigrants, and so you'll find a lot of, for example, Asian Americans, Mexican Americans, fill in the blank. It can be, that American can come from any country and can have an identity separate from being American. And so let me ask you this, Leon. Do you consider yourself to have a dual culture, dual identity?
Oh yeah, absolutely. To me, I'm first generation, so my parents are different cultures.
Yes.
But for me, because growing up, I didn't really fit into that kind of culture because I was not taught or had that kind of history background, the education. So I was more American because my parents were both working class citizens. They worked a lot of hours. So the only thing that really raised me is the streets, the my friends, the people in my neighborhood. So for me, I consider myself as an American just because of that. Yeah. And
Hmm.
what about you?
Yeah, I think that like you, consider myself American. I think being American is also a mindset. So if we're talking, mindset and how I think that I have a definitely a very American mindset. And living outside the U.S. right now, I'm often told, "Oh, you are so American." By the way I do things, my outlook on things, the way I perceive things, my wants, my desires, all those things shape who we are and how people see us. And I think that people see, although they see me an Asian face outside the U.S., uh, you know, there may be not, they've not been exposed to as many multicultural people. So all they see in the beginning is they see an Asian face, but then at the same time, it doesn't take much time for them to realize that despite that, I am very I'm very American. And because a lot of times people who don't have a lot of exposure to Americans, they always like they see a face and then they immediately think that whatever you look like, you must be a citizen or people of a certain country. You know what I mean? Like if they
Hmm.
see if they see an Asian face, they might think, oh, obviously this person is from Asia. And while we can trace my roots back to Asia, um, in fact, I identify more as American. And I think that a lot of others in America who have dual culture, they either identify with both cultures or there is one culture that excuse me, that they primarily identify as. And for me, it's American.
Yeah, and the problem too is being a dual, multicultural type backgrounds. I mean, as growing up as in the US, because like you talked about, the many people are not exposed, and then they look at you and the features and the appearance, then they start questioning like, am I, what am I this culture or am I American? And then
Right.
when you go to this culture, it's like nobody accepts you in that culture because they know that you're not in their culture because of your history background and your personality, your characters, your beliefs. And then you
You're
go
right.
to an American and they say, well, you're not really American because of your appearance and how you look and all that. So you kind of fall in between, like, what am I? Am I this or am I that? So for me, it's just like you said, self-belief. You got to believe in what you believe in and stay with that because of how you were brought up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like for those of us who grew up with this dual identity, maybe some people may feel unaccepted both in their own let's say their ethnicity, right? Like for example, if you're Asian American, you may feel unaccepted in by other Asians, like Asians in Asia, because underneath you don't have the same mindset. You don't think the same way. You don't live the same way. So you might feel unaccepted in that group, but at the same time, you also might feel unaccepted by, like, let's say white Americans, for example. And so you're sort of in this purgatory, right? I guess for some
Hmm.
people it could be like that.
Hmm. And then sometimes you may not even speak their language too, and that's why you're not
True.
accepted. Or even though you do
Yes.
speak their language, you're not really a local because you have that kind of American accent or that accent. So you still don't fall into that category. So it really depends on how they view things. So for me, because I lived a different life. So I mean, if I lived another life, let's say my parents brought me up in this type of culture, then I would feel more accepted, or I feel that I am more that culture. But because I was not brought up that way and I was brought up, by American culture, television, and I didn't have a babysitter, and I basically with my friends and, by myself, I was more American because what raised me really is the television, what I've seen in
Mm-hmm.
television, Hollywood, and the things that I've watched, that kind of built in my identity. Yeah.
Yes. Right, right. And so I guess the thing that people should understand is that as America matures, as America becomes older as a country, there's going to be more and more mixing. So I think increasingly so, and with increasing immigration, America, and there's this phrase they say, the browning of America. Have you heard this before? the politicians
Yeah,
are
I heard.
using this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right.
So that basically America is becoming less and less just white. And so I think that's more than ever important to understand how multicultural America is. And I think that it's a great thing because I think that is what gives this country its strength and unique character that many other countries do not have, which is, because of the dual culture, the dual identity of its people. It's almost like you take the best of another culture and then you bring it into the mix, sort of like natural selection, genetic diversity. So that is what enables America to be so strong and to be so innovative and to have such ideas that really drive human innovation and drive uh, our our people, humanity, forward, because we have different points of view and we celebrate diversity and difference. That is the strength of our country. The backbone of our country is the difference, right?
Yeah. And the thing that I find pretty astonishing and weird too is when you talk to foreigners who are non-Americans, and they always say like you don't look American or you don't sound American. And then you just ask them, well, what is an American to you? And the number one thing they always say is, well, blonde hair, blue eyes, or blonde hair, green eyes. And it's
Hmm.
like, but that's not what America's about, right? Because you just
Right.
did describe that it's about immigration. It's about immigrants coming to the United States. That's the backbone of US, of how great our country is. And people don't realize that, many people migrate to the United States from different parts of the world, Middle East, Latin America, Asia, and all of that places. But yet, a lot of people outside, because they're not exposed or never visited US, to them is what they see in Hollywood and say, well, you don't look American. And
Right.
what is an American, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that is also shaped by the media. Of course, that's changing. It's slowly changing, but the people who are in control of the media still tend to be, at least in the forefront. Um, I guess either predominantly black or white. I think that other cultures are starting to come into the mix, but it takes time. It just takes time. You can't dilute something all that quickly, right? It just takes time.
Yeah, and it really depends on the person. Like, if the person really um, opens up and educates themselves and start watching other types of films, that's American films, not just isolate and watch like just white America or Black America. I mean, they need to really expose that there are other cultures out there besides, Black and white. There are, like you mentioned, Latino American, Asian American, Middle East American. So but a lot of them choose to only watch the white America. And I think that's what is kind of like a brainwash from Hollywood. And that's why they think that all Americans are in a white culture. Yeah. I mean,
Sure.
it's true that to a certain point that even though we do have a diversity and a large population of immigrants like in United States, 70% or maybe even 65 to 70% is still white America. I mean, the bigger cities is more diverse, but when you start going to rural cities and other parts of the state, it's still considered white America. That is true, but
Yes.
not many people understands that.
Yeah, and what's also really interesting? I noticed as I've lived in Asia for a short period of time, and I've traveled around Asia. What I've noticed in their media is that, for example, the models they use for fashion, very often and more than using Asians, they use Caucasians, right? So it's almost like,
Yes,
yeah, so it's almost like they're shooting themselves in the foot because they are defining a beauty from the lens of Caucasians and within their own country. So rather than using Asian models, they oftentimes will use white models. And this is
yes,
very interesting because what I have noticed also is that, like in America, our models are way more diverse than models in other countries, or like, for example, that I've seen, in Asian countries. It's very interesting that we probably use more Asian models than Asians do in Asian countries. Isn't that interesting?
yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's a great point that you brought up. I mean, what they commercialize is because of the beauty. I had one student that says, it's just they look beautiful. Why does foreigners consider like white? I mean, it's just easy on the eyes, I guess you can
Oh
say.
my,
That's
yeah.
what one of my student mentioned.
Hmm.
And with with Americans, I mean, even in the ESL industry, right? I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of students pick out the white Americans, or
Oh,
not even the
right,
white
right.
Americans. They consider the white, the Caucasians, thinking that they are Americans because they feel that's what Americans are. So they feel that they're gonna learn more better from a white
Yes.
American than an African American or Latin American or an Asian American. And you
Right.
see that there's lack of representation in that field in the ESL. And you look at YouTube, you look at all the other, Instagram, most of the majority of the followers are Caucasian, whether they are
Yeah.
American, Native American, or maybe just, white or Caucasian, basically. And to me, if you find like an Asian American, Latin American, or even African American, it's very seldom that you find that in the ESL. And I think it's kind of sad because
Hmm.
that's how people ends up choosing based on the appearance and not based on the qualifications and the education.
Well, you know what? That just kind of affirms what I've always thought is never underestimate how stupid people can be. But
Yeah,
but
right.
here's the thing, right? I think it's so ridiculous to think that you should and can or maybe automatically go, that you're drawn to just a quote a white American, uh, with whom you're going to learn English, because the whole ignorance in that is that what you don't realize, and I'm always saying this, is that people are saying, yeah, I want to learn from a native speaker, and I'm like, you do realize that in a country, America, of 350 million people, you do realize, I hope, that many Americans who quote are native speakers are very uneducated and also speak
Yeah,
terrible English. And so if you're
that's true.
choosing somebody just because they're a native or just because they're a white American thinking that their English is good, then you would be wrong, because there, the no natives, excuse me, what I'm trying to say is native speakers are not all created equally, right? It really depends on their
Yes,
level of education and all that. And there's plenty of
correct.
very ignorant, illiterate Americans who, yeah, they're native, but they might have the accent, but that is nobody you'd want to learn English from. And yes, that is unfortunate that a lot of people, um, maybe they themselves are not very sophisticated, and so they go sort of. It's almost like how like in prison, everything is very lowest common denominator, right?
Mhm.
Everybody's just either black, white, or brown. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
it's almost like when people make these choices like this, like, oh, I'm going to learn English, I'm going to go to the blonde American. That's it. That's going to be the one. That's almost sort of like the same dynamic as in a prison where everybody's reduced to the lowest common denominator, and it is very well for the person who's choosing this person. They're not they're not seeing the whole picture, but also at the same time, it also devalues everybody in the whole process, not just the person who's the blonde Caucasian who they've chosen, but it devalues the entire population and the whole pool of people.
yeah. And a lot of people, I mean, the white America too, there are a lot who are illiterate. They can't read or
Yes.
write. They may
Right.
speak clearly or good speakers, but they can't read or write. And a lot of people don't understand that.
Right.
Some of them are, like you said, they're not educated and never have any college degree. They're just
Hmm.
high school. Some of them are high school dropouts. So we have a lot of different, yeah, we have a different type of people all around the United States, and not everyone's equal. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. But back to this thing with Kamala Harris.
Hmm.
She's half Indian and half black. So they're saying that she's, not to be trusted because she will identify with being Indian if she needs to. She'll identify as black if she needs to. I mean, do you think that's a bad thing when you have? I feel like everybody uses or should use every weapon in their arsenal, right? So if she's speaking to an Indian contingency, why wouldn't she sort of try to bond with them by the fact that she has Indian culture in her, and while at the same time, if she's speaking to an African American audience, why wouldn't she, you know, let them know or bond through that shared experience, right? You need to use everything you've got. I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing. Do you?
No, not at all. I think it's a great thing that she's, dual cultural. For me, I don't see nothing wrong with it. But the way she handles it, I mean, it's like she introduces herself as black, and that's what I hear from her. She talks about black. She's has black background, but yet she isolates being Indian. What happened to her Indian? I mean, if she can also promote her being Indian and not just say one isolate and say, I'm black and mislead people. But wait a minute, you're dual. You're black and Indian, but yet you're isolating the Indian part and you're just going with the black.
I
To
see.
me,
Yeah.
I don't kind of agree with that aspect because to me it's like you're ignoring your Indian heritage part. So I think you should kind of promote both and say, I'm maybe more black, or maybe I was raised with black family and I have this kind of black culture. I mean, if she talks about that kind of thing, okay, but she's mostly just talking about her skin color, and then yet
Right.
she forgets about her
Okay.
Indian. Yeah,
Yes, I see what you're saying. So maybe it would be more acceptable if she celebrated the fact that she was of a dual heritage, as opposed to being so strategic about, or overly strategic about it, and focusing on one because she feels like one is better than the other and it serves her needs right now. I think you're right. It would be better if she would just say, yes, I am of these two cultures, and within that is a certain strength and
yeah,
perspective, as opposed to just being one thing. Like Trump said, all of a sudden she went from Indian to turning black. It sounds funny and ridiculous, but I understand what he's saying. Basically,
hmm
he's saying that she was working the whole Indian thing. She was working that to the max, and now that it
yeah,
no longer serves her needs, all of a sudden now
yes.
she's going to work the fact that she's black, because
hmm
she thinks that it'll help her more. In a way, the subtext also in that is that, okay, now she's throwing away her Indian heritage because it doesn't serve her. It's not going to help her in the campaign. So screw you guys, screw the Indians. I'm going black. That's kind of like what Trump is saying about her.
Yeah. And I think from what Trump said, I think the news media kind of takes it out of proportion. And because,
Yeah.
you can see that there's favoritism in the news media, that they're more
Yeah.
pro-Democrat than they are Republican, or maybe not even pro-Republican. They're just, pro-Democrat. Yeah.
Well, I
I mean,
think that
they're really against Trump, basically. Yeah.
yeah, I think that, but also just keeping in mind, right? The media, the news, the reporters, their goal, yeah, high level. We're here to deliver the news, high level, right? And the truth.
hmm
But these days, I really feel like their goal is to get clicks. Their goal is to get
Yes.
advertising. So just keep that in mind. If they can get you to click with some crazy headline, they've met their goal. And I
Yeah.
really have the cynicism about the media where I think that maybe at best they hope to deliver truth and maybe neutrality in what they're reporting, but really, I think really they just want the advertising money, they want the clicks. That's why headlines are written the way they're written. I've seen headlines written a certain way. Yeah, it got me to click. And then as I read further on, I'm like, oh, come on. The headline and the
Yeah.
substance of it doesn't match. And then when you further do your own fact checking, then you're just like, oh my God, that's a really clever way of twisting this whole thing. I've seen it happen. So,
Yeah.
this idea of fake news, it's very real. The most real thing is the fact that it fake is real.
Yeah. They know, no, they normally, well, they don't report the actual news anymore, like what they did in the past, like in the early 70s or 60s. I mean, you focus in the news, what's happening, and they're just straightforward. Nowadays, they're just all about ratings. So if they're going to
Yeah,
twist it and manipulate things, they're going to do that because they want the ratings. So it's no longer the news for me. So for me, I really don't watch the news anymore because when you watch the news, everything is all negative and it's all hand picked and what they want to discuss. And it's kind of like a bit of a brainwashing thing. So I just don't watch
sure,
the news
sure.
anymore. I just
Yeah.
select what I want to read. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. The facts are very curated and they're very slanted, and that's why there exists this idea of different version of the facts. That didn't come out of nowhere. It has come onto the scene because of the way reporting is done these days. But anyway,
Yeah.
um, okay. So back to this idea of dual heritage. Um, do you think that at the end of the day, having dual heritage is a great thing, or do you think that it's better to have one, just a single heritage, just to be, I suppose, um, your typical either white or black American?
Yeah, before I answer that, I'd like to hear the people's comments and say about, the propaganda in their country, what they feel about. Do they have the same thing with the news and also with maybe in their, dual identity? I mean, how are they being identified in their culture, in their country? So I'd like to hear their comments on that.
Yes, please. So please leave a comment. Let us know how you feel about what we're discussing, and please contribute. And also, please give this video a thumbs up. Let us know that you liked this video, and please also subscribe. Click that subscribe button and also the bell next to the subscribe button. Select all, and that way you'll know when we upload future videos. Okay, so we're talking once again about uh, having a dual culture in America, dual culture, two identities, and how America, the browning of America, it's been said that America is not necessarily just black or white, but it's just getting more and more mixed. And that's what's happening. And both Leon and me, we both have a dual culture. We both have a sort of a dual identity. And that's what we're talking about. So let's get back to you, Leon. You were going to tell us.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's a great thing having a dual, you know, background identity. So because you get the best of two worlds, right? So
Sure,
you
yeah.
just take the best of it and you bring your own and you create your own identity, right? You don't have to like be isolated or be that, one particular thing and follow the leader kind of thing. You make your own lead. You become a leader and follow what you believe in, take the best of whatever your culture is, and also with the American culture. Um, yeah, you get the best of it, like in terms of food, fashion, uh, the identity, the heritage, the history. I mean, you get all of that thing. So I don't see nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, what about you?
No, I think it's a great thing. It's kind of like it's almost like traveling, right? You may have one country that you love, but isn't it great to be able to visit more than one country? And that's how I feel having a dual identity, that you have sort of exposure, and you have some insight into multiple worlds, right? So for
Mhm.
people who have more than two identity, that's even better.
Yeah. And I guess the bad part of it is, there being that kind of identity, you get kind of I guess you kind of get stereotyped, and that's the
Hmm.
bad thing about it. People don't really understand what your true background or you as a person, because they're too busy looking at the outside and stereotyping you and putting you in a box and say, okay, you're in this category, you're in that category. So I think that's the bad thing about of having a dual thing. I mean, in terms of, whatever it is, whether it's a job, whether it's, uh police, profiled by the
All right.
police,
Yes.
all kinds of things, media too, economic, everything kind of affects you having that dual, identity and heritage. So, but it really, like I said, it really depends on you believing in yourself and staying it and be the voice and speak out and actually, uh, represent people that don't have a voice. Yeah.
I think that as America is becoming more and more diverse, I think it is really an asset to have this, to not just to have multiple or dual identities, but to just have cultural insight into as many different cultures as possible. Because as many cultures and as many ethnicities as there are in the world, we have that in America. It's just mixed. It's always going to be what something dash American, right? So I think,
Mhm.
if anything, I think I think you have a certain advantage. There's certain advantages to having dual identity or more than one identity culturally in America. It's going to serve you well, and especially since America. I don't know if it's like just a trend, or this is for sure the way forward, but we love diversity, right?
Mhm.
Diversity, in the workplace, diversity in universities, we love that. So having that multiple, cultural identities is a great thing for you. I think if anything, it'll open doors, and it'll help open minds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When you said about open doors, I mean, For example, if you have a Middle Eastern background, you know, you look Middle East, you can maybe speak a little bit of Middle East, you know, Arabic or and you know, you're American, you're more American, but yet if you want to do business with Middle East, when they look at you, even though they know you're American, they're gonna feel more, I guess, have that business connection with you than say with a white American because they can understand that you're in from their history, their ancestry, so they can kind of favor you over the white American if you were doing that kind of business, or even an Asian or Latino, right? So
Yeah.
I think that kind of works to your favor. Yeah.
That's true. There are certain people who are in businesses like, like smaller businesses where the source of their business is 100% their, within their own ethnic community. And even with that, and that tells you, that speaks to the power and sheer volume of people in America, in that you can have a customer base of just people of your ethnicity and you can still thrive. You can still become very successful, just, catering to people of one ethnicity. And there are a lot of like small businesses in America that are like that.
Hmm. Exactly. I mean, the only bad part, but then again, is it really an identity or a cultural identity? Because I think it's more of a different aspect, like say on an education, if you're more of a poorer area in a neighborhood, you're not going to get the right education. It's not going to favor you. But most of that poor area are maybe a minority background, whether they're African American, Latino American, most likely not Asian American, because usually they have better, you know, money and they go to better schools. But let's just say with the Latin America and African American, they're the one who dis kind of disadvantaged
Hmm.
because of their poverty status or their, you know, poorer area, rural area, and it doesn't work to their favor because of. But I don't think it's really an identity culture. I think it's just more of, I don't know, maybe just a status of your social status. Yeah, more. I think it's more of a social status than it is more of a cultural identity status. It just happens that they're poor, whether they're white, black, Asian, Latino. If you're poor, you're poor. It doesn't really discriminate. You're just poor. So they end up getting the poor education. So it's not necessarily an identity thing. Yeah.
Oh, sure. And also there's this idea of uh, economic identity, right? Where people of a certain social strata, socioeconomic strata, they are more
Hmm.
alike than they are different. I mean, a lot of times I feel like in my travels and the people that I've met, I feel like, well, first of all, I feel like people in general are more similar than they are dissimilar. But at the same time, beyond looking at somebody's ethnicity, their color, or where they're from, you need to look at the socioeconomic status because that will inform you better. If you're going to stereotype at all, I feel like if you base it on their socioeconomic status, that will inform you, actually, I think, better than where they're from, their color, their, the country they're from. Yeah, so because this is what I've noticed is that um, people of a certain socioeconomic strata, they all kind of do the same thing. They all have very similar aspirations. They've traveled to sort of the same places. They encounter the same type of people. And that mixing in that pool at that level, at that socioeconomic level, is sort of different than at a different socioeconomic level. And I think that it creates people that are more similar sometimes than even people who are of the same ethnicity. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah, and looking at travel, I mean, travel can be kind of a favoritism too. I mean, you see a lot of the Americans, the majority of Americans travel to Europe, right? They go to France, Germany, or London or
yeah.
England. But yet they don't travel too much in South America or in Asia, I'm talking
Yeah.
about. So there is a favoritism there. They don't travel to Middle Easterns and things like that. So there is kind of a favoritism in terms of identity. I mean, for me, I don't know. It's still a white privilege. I mean, if you're white, you have that white privilege, no matter. I mean, if you're in an economic situation, if you're applying for a job and you're white, versus somebody who's minority and you have the same equal, education status and, maybe skills and things like that, I still think that the company will favor you more than maybe the minority in terms of a higher position, say, CFO or controller or president. Um, to me, the hierarchy of those corporate offices are still run by white, and I think they want to. I'd hate to say it, but to me, again, this is my personal opinion. If you disagree with me, put your comments. But I still think that they want to favor them more and put the hierarchy in that rule. Um, maybe it's just a maybe it's just what the past history is. But I still think that the white privilege, the white people, they really don't want to talk about it, and they say, oh, not again, not about this white privilege or discrimination, etc. I think they just want to keep it in bay because they enjoy their privilege. I mean, if I have that privilege, why would I want to discuss it? Why would I want to change it? Why would I want to damage it? I like that privilege. I like
Yeah,
that advantage. Anybody
that's
wants
true.
that advantage. So for me, like, you go to the ESL industry, which is the, you know, English teaching and learning, and they don't want to talk about these issues. These are like triggers, and they don't want to educate the people. Why? Because they like where they are. It's all about the coin, right? It's all about the money. So they want to make sure they make that coin. They don't want to make any change. Why would they want to change? It's all about the profit. It's all about the money. So I mean, that's me. That's my personal opinion about the whole thing. I mean, you look at the politics, everything is still white privilege. It's still run by white. You look at Hollywood, still the same thing. I mean, the majority of it. I'm talking about the majority of it. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
Also, not just white, if you're as we're talking about white privilege, but specifically white males, right? Not
Yeah,
even white females, but white males.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is changing. That is changing because now you're starting to see at the C level, like C level executives, you're seeing more women and women of color. And
Hmm.
so it is changing because it's been identified.
Hmm.
This thing has been identified, what you're talking about. And so I think that people are trying
Yeah.
to make the change. But then at the same time, look, I think that with these kinds of things, it does require it to change. Maybe, unfortunately, um, it needs to maybe progress at a slow enough pace where it can be done properly so that we're not shoehorning people who are not a good fit into these positions just so that we can check that box off, right? um,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it does need it. I think what it needs it needs to happen naturally, but at the same time, there needs to be a constant awareness that yes, are we still doing it? Are we still progressing? Like we have to constantly check and verify that it's moving along, but at the same time, not to rush it. I think not to rush
Hmm.
it. Let it also happen at the same time, but give it some momentum.
Yeah, I think it's more just the education and more voice. People needs to say what they really true and believe instead of being politically incorrect. I mean, you have VP Kamala Harris now, who's a presidential candidate. I mean, she's a dual identity. Why doesn't she, speak more about both? Why does she have to isolate one and put aside the other? I mean, I think she needs to speak out more about that. Same thing with Ushma, who's the wife of the vice president candidate, J.D. Vance. I mean, I would like to see her more and step up and really use that voice of her heritage and to speak up. Now that she's Indian American heritage, I think she just needs to educate the people out there because they have the platform. We don't have the platform. They have that high platform that can really make an impact and change our society, instead of tearing it apart. Yeah.
Yes, we ultimately, at least I, will ultimately vote for the one who's I think is most qualified to do the job, not just as it pertains to our
Yeah.
election, but ultimately we choose people who are capable. We will give people of color a chance, but ultimately I'm going to choose the one who I think is more capable. If it happens to be the person of color, great. If it happens to be just a white American, that's fine too. I I want the most qualified person. I just think that the best analogy is if you're going to have surgery, do you want somebody who you're going to choose somebody just because of their color, or do you want to choose somebody who's
Yeah.
going to do a good job, right? Ultimately, we want choose somebody who's going to do the job properly. And in that regard, we are colorblind. We want somebody who is qualified, most qualified. And then in that case, I really don't care what color, what ethnicity, what culture you're from.
Precisely. And that's a great analysis. I mean, being as a doctor, I mean, do you want somebody who's really qualified or are you just picking based on race? The thing that's mind blowing for me that drives me insane is like when people say, I'm going to vote for Camila because she's black. And
Oh
that's it.
God. Yeah.
There's no reasons behind it of, you know, what her beliefs are or anything is just going based on color.
Yeah.
I'm going to vote for her because she's black. But yet again, they forget that she's also Indian because she's promoting herself as black. To me, it
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense as an American to do that. I mean, it's just example what you just said. I mean, do you want somebody who's going to operate you based on the qualification or just based on their, you know, color of their skin? And if that color of their skin isn't as qualified as the other person, do you really want that person to operate on you? I definitely don't. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, so last comment, final thoughts before we wrap up.
For me, I think is just, you know, use your use your mind, critically think, and to really evaluate and not just base it on appearance. I mean, that's the thing
Yeah.
I like about a lot of the Brazil, the majority. They look at the person in the inside and not on the outside. Yeah, we are at fault by doing that in US. We look at the outside based on the inside. For me, it's just a matter of education. You know, take the time to educate yourself and to really, you know, give people and not stereotype. You may be wrong at times, and just go ahead and you know, educate yourself. That's the way I say it. Just educate yourself. Just don't believe in the race and the color. I mean, you really have to do your background. I mean, that's my belief. Yeah.
Yeah,
How
that's
about you?
just yeah, I agree. I mean, that's just a starting point, you know. You may
Yeah.
you may bond with somebody, you may feel like they speak to you more on an emotional level because you're of the same background or heritage. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of the fact that, you know, how qualified you actually are is very important. So not to forget that,
Hmm.
even if you know, bond with somebody just because of their color or ethnicity because it's similar or the same as yours.
Hmm. Exactly.
All right, everybody. Well, we're at the end here. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you're still here, I'm guessing you enjoyed it. So please support this video by giving it a thumbs up. And also please subscribe. Click that subscribe button and also make sure you click the bell and select all. That way YouTube will show you future videos that we upload. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Leon, for being here with us. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben, for having me. Thanks everyone for sticking around. See you guys next time.
All right. See you guys in the next video. Bye-bye for now.
Ciao.